The click of his heels against the polished deck was the only sound in the sudden vacuum of the Archon's attention. Silas didn't look back. He didn't offer a parting platitude or a face-saving excuse. He simply left. Behind him, the gilded hall of Bastion Nexus seemed to shrink, the voices of 1,000 dignitaries muffled by the heavy thud of the airlock closing. It was the silent exit that echoed across the stars, a ripple in the expected order of things. Archon Valerius had spent the evening treating him as an accessory to the room, but she learned quickly what happens when furniture stands up and walks out. 6 hours earlier, Silas had been in front of a small, cracked mirror in his quarters, adjusting his collar until his fingers went numb. The fabric of his dress uniform was stiff, smelling faintly of the starch and recycled air of the station. This wasn't just a dinner. It was a plea for the survival of terra firma. The Astrum hegemony didn't look at humans as equals. In fact, they looked at them as a biological curiosity with a short shelf life and a troublesome habit of asking for rights. He told his team to stay sharp, to show the Archon that humanity had a place at the table, even if they had to build the table themselves. The hall was a cathedral of light and cold, geometric perfection. Silas walked through the crowd, feeling the eyes of the hegemony elite sliding over him like oil on glass. They saw his rank, they saw his species, and they dismissed him before he could even speak. But when he finally stood before Valerius, he felt a flicker of something else. She was tall, her skin the color of a bruised plum, her eyes shifting through shades of violet as she processed the room. "Commander Vane," she had said, her voice like grinding stones. "Your people are persistent." Silas had offered a hand the Terran gesture of peace. She'd stared at it as if he were offering her a piece of trash, her expression unreadable. Still, he had pushed forward. He spoke of the colonies, of the inherent worth of their labor and the stability they could offer the coalition. He spoke of partnership, not subservience. And for a moment he thought she was listening. He saw the way her primary eyes locked onto his, the way she leaned in just an inch. But then, a legate entered the room, a creature of high status and higher arrogance. Without a word, without even a nod of dismissal, Valerius simply turned her back. She began a conversation with the newcomer as if Silas had ceased to exist. The heat rose in his chest, a slow-burning realization. He was choosing personal gravity over political groveling. He realized that respect based on status is a fragile thing compared to the dignity a man carries in his own skin. He didn't wait for her to turn back. He didn't wait for the crumbs of her attention. Ironically, the walk to the hangar felt lighter than the walk to the ballroom. He could feel the eyes of the guards on him, confused, startled by his sudden departure. They expected him to wait. They expected him to endure the snub for the sake of the mission. But as he reached the docking ring, the station's proximity alarms began to wail, a low, guttural vibration that shook the marrow of his bones. The hull of the research vessel Aurelia groaned, a scream of twisting metal that vibrated through the soles of Silas's boots. Red emergency lighting bathed the corridor in a rhythmic, sickening pulse. To his left, a bulkhead buckled inward under the pressure of the pirate tractor beam, the screech of steel on steel, drowning out the frantic internal comms. Silas didn't look at the readout. He looked at Archon Valerius, who was pressed against the vibrating wall, her regal composure stripped away by the raw, unscripted terror of a hull breach. "Move," Silas barked, grabbing the Archon's arm and shoving her toward the venting airlock. He didn't ask permission. He didn't check her rank. The ambush had been surgical. While the hegemony's massive cruisers sat lumbering and blind in the debris field, the pirate skiffs had latched onto the Aurelia like leeches. Silas had reached the vessel just as the first boarding pods pierced the skin. Now, the ship was being dragged toward a pirate harvester, a jagged maw of scrap metal and death. In the secondary engine room, Silas found his team. They were a mess of grease and sweat technicians, a cook, and 2 junior ensigns. He didn't give them a speech. Instead, he dropped to his knees beside a scorched terminal and looked at his youngest engineer. "Ideas, Leo." "Give me something," Silas demanded. The Archon watched, breathless, as the boy stammered out a plan involving a localized feedback loop. Silas nodded, trusting the boy's expertise over his own authority. They worked with a frantic, synchronized energy, A team built on the understanding that every life in the room carried the same weight. Valeria stood in the shadows, her violet eyes tracking the way Silas took a blow for an instant when a steam pipe burst, the way he listened to the cook's warning about the structural integrity of the aft deck. The tractor beam was the anchor. It was dragging them to the slaughter, and the controls were slagged. The only way to break the lock was to manually sever the emitter coupling from the outside, a suicide run through a corridor of venting plasma. Silas began to seal his helmet, his movements methodical, despite the tremor in his hands. But a heavy, cold hand caught his shoulder. Valeria stepped forward. Her skin was blistered from the heat, and her ornate robes were charred, but the look in her eyes had shifted. She wasn't looking at an inferior species anymore. She was looking at a standard she hadn't known existed. "Your biology will not survive the radiation in that shaft," she said, her voice steady for the first time since the alarms began. "Mine might." She didn't wait for his protest. Trading a crown for a classroom, she moved toward the plasma vent. She reached into the blinding white light, her primary eyes squeezed shut, her hands melting into the interface as she tore the coupling free. The ship lurched. The hum of the tractor beam died into a beautiful, ringing silence. Weeks later, the atmosphere on Silas's homeworld was different, thicker, sweeter, and heavy with the scent of damp earth. He stood on the porch of a small academy, watching a transport descend. Valeria stepped out, stripped of her hegemony finery, wearing the simple linens of a scholar. She had survived the radiation, though her hands were now webbed with silver scars. She walked up to him, her gaze lingering on the horizon where the suns were setting. She wasn't there to negotiate a treaty. She was there to learn why a man would walk away from a queen, and why a queen would almost die for a man who treated furniture like family. Truth is, the hegemony had the power, but Silas had the gravity. And as they walked into the classroom together, terra firma's seat in the coalition wasn't just a matter of politics. It was a matter of respect. "Would you like me to generate an image of Archon Valerius and her simple scholar's robes on the human homeworld?"